Hi. Well, you all know about internet garbage fires, right? You've been on Twitter. But I'm going to talk about my friend Asia, who knows a lot about internet garbage fires. So Asia worked at TED.com, the people who do TED Talks, for 5 years as a community manager. So that sounds great, right? Because TED is amazing. And so you imagine like, oh, community manager, she's just going to be engaging with all these cool people who are really smart and just curious about the world. No, being a community manager means you're responsible for the comments. And so comments, as we all know, are often garbage fire. So even on a site like TED, the awesome, intelligent voices were being drowned out by people saying terrible things and like threatening to throw acid in each other's faces. True story. So my friend Asia worried constantly. She spent every day deleting terrible comments. She spent nights and weekends deleting terrible comments. She would wake up in the middle of the night in a blind panic that someone had posted something terrible on the website while she was sleeping, because it was her job to keep things civil and respectful. So she set out to make her job and her life easier. And she was super lucky to be at TED because they're a super supportive and innovative organization, and they really supported everything that she tried. So here's what she did. She got more involved in the online community management scene. She hosted summits for other community managers to come and brainstorm these problems. She reached out to specific commenters about their bad behavior, and that would sometimes have a short-term positive effect. But it made no lasting change, and there were always new people coming in up to the same old stuff. So that was increased involvement. But the next thing she did was she started learning to code. She at first just ran simple database queries, and then she learned a little more and started building some internal tools to make moderation easier. And it still wasn't enough, so she eventually hired an outsourced moderation team. And that was better, but there were still more commenters than moderators, so it was just kind of impossible to keep up. So then she started writing natural language processing algorithms, as you do, to try and screen out the bad comments. And she did pretty well. She got to about 80% accuracy, which is great, but it left 20% as false positives and false negatives, and she never knew which was which. So humans would end up having to read 100% of the comments anyway. And on TED.com, anywhere between 20 and 50% of the comments needed to be deleted. So basically, she tried a bunch of stuff. Nothing worked, and people were still writing terrible things in the comments. And here's where I come into the story. So I had known Asia for a long time. We actually met way back when we both worked at an animation studio in Portland, Oregon. But so I had been hearing about this problem with the comments for literally years. And I had become a lot more aware of online harassment in recent years. And so Asia came to me and said, there has to be a tech solution to, people treating each other terribly online. What do you think? So, hi, I'm Christa Mrgan, and I am co-founder of Civil, makers of Civil Comments. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're designing our software to improve the way people treat each other online, and how this is actually a thing that everyone can do, not just us. So Asia and I talked about why comments even needed moderation in the first place. Why are people so terrible to each other online? And a lot of really smart people have just sort of thrown their hands up at this problem and said, that's just the way the internet is. That's how people are. It's human nature. But if that's the case, then why are most of us, including these trolls, why are most of us reasonable offline? In our daily lives, what keeps most of us from yelling at strangers and acting violently or threatening each other? And the answer, partially, is that in addition to our human nature, we also have this second nature, right, that we learn as we grow up and live in society with other people. There are all of these invisible cultural norms in real life that keep most of us acting relatively civil and respectful in the company of strangers. And there's a great book about this, not just about this, but you should totally read it. The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker primarily talks about how and why violence has declined over the course of human history. And there's a lot to take away from this book, but something that struck Asia and struck me when we read it was this idea of a learned second nature and how community and society really shape our behavior in general, and how social feedback and cultural pressure keep most of us in check. And no matter what we're doing, we always think our own actions are justified, and whatever the prevailing cultural norms are really dictate that to a large degree. So when you're writing a comment on the internet, you're removed from these day-to-day cultural norms that, for the most part, are really invisible in real life. And you're sitting in front of an empty text field, separated from other people, and you likely have some strong emotions, and there's nothing really stopping you from writing something terrible and sending it out into the world. You just type your comment, hit submit, and there it is on the page. And it might be flagged and taken down later, but by that point, the damage is pretty much done. So most social platforms, like comments, have no social feedback. There's no cultural pressure to be reasonable or civil. So we realized that we needed to interrupt this moment when people are about to write something terrible and really get them to think about the other humans who are eventually going to see this. We needed to add some kind of social feedback to the process. And so self-reflection is one key aspect to designing to improve behavior. You have to get people to really think about what they're doing and how it will be perceived by others, because when you do that, it's so much harder for them to justify bad behavior. So there were a lot of goofy ideas to begin with. Like Asia was like, well, what if you had to look at a picture of the author before you wrote your comment? And it's like, would you still be able to say something terrible if you had to look them in the eye? Or what if we could make them turn on their webcam and look at themselves for 5 seconds before they were able to submit the comment? But eventually that idea became crowdsourced moderation. We realized we could get people to both self-reflect and have them enforce cultural norms if, before their comment could be published, they first had to rate 3 other comments from strangers for quality and civility. So we reasoned that the overall effect would be the community deciding what behavior was acceptable and what wasn't. And there'd be that added social pressure of knowing that your comment was going to be read by other people and judged the way you were sitting in judgment of them. And as a last step to really get people to self-reflect, we would have them rate their own comment for civility and give them a chance to make edits if they had second thoughts. So this was the first pass of the UI. We did usertesting.com and a big open test back in September of last year. Over 200 people came and participated in that, so if anyone here was part of that, thank you so much. And the initial tests were super successful, but they also revealed some real weaknesses here. So this design has both quality and civility side by side, which we realized people would just choose the lowest rating on each of those if they just didn't like the comment. And the sort of choosing 1 to 4 for each quality and civility was kind of too much of too much work, kind of a heavy cognitive load. So we tweaked it a bit, went through a few iterations, and we ended up breaking up the questions. And this worked great because it let users get out that initial knee-jerk reaction. So a user writes their comment, and then they read a comment, and they're asked first, is this a good comment? And there are 3 options: yes, no, and sorta. So there's some wiggle room there if you don't have a super strong opinion. And it's a lot faster than figuring out what your 1 to 4 rating would be. But also, just showing that question first, if they have a strong visceral reaction to the comment, they can get that right out of the way. And this question doesn't affect whether or not a comment is published, but it does affect how a comment is ranked when it's sorted by highest rating. But anyway, it gets that out of the way so you can get to the real question, which is it civil? And for that, there are only 2 options, yes and no. So it's super simple and direct. Is this something that should be on the site, whether or not you like it? Okay, but we did this testing, we changed our interface, but I hear what you're thinking. How do you keep people from cheating? Even by breaking up the questions, you're still not preventing people from just voting down things they disagree with. And you're not preventing people from just clicking yes to get through the process really quickly. So that was a huge concern for us from day one, because it's a lot like the fox running the hen house, right? So this is where the algorithms come into play, actually. So natural language processing algorithms don't work well enough to make pass-fail decisions. There are a lot of smart people working on this at Google and Twitter and Facebook, and it doesn't work. Not yet. Look at YouTube comments and you'll know what I mean. But it turns out that while algorithms aren't good at analyzing text, people really are, and algorithms are great at analyzing patterns of human behavior. So in our system, each comment gets reviewed by multiple people. And depending on those reviews and who is doing the reviewing, a single comment can get as many as 5 different reviews. And Our algorithms work as a unified behavior engine that pools and analyzes all of this data and makes publication decisions based on the data. So it's kind of like a judge carrying out the will of a jury, except that we also vet the jury for patterns of bias and abuse. So we call this system CivilBot, and so far it's working really well. And we found that people aren't just divided into like good and bad actors. There are actually 3 types of behavior in our system that are bad that we look for. So there are bad comments, people who submit comments that have a high percentage of rejection from the community. Then there are bad votes, consistent patterns of bias in your ratings. And then there are bad flags. Some people just like to go on flagging rampages against people they dislike and mark all their comments as spam when they're actually fine and they get overturned by moderators. So there's 3 different types of behavior. And surprisingly, for example, like a bad commenter can actually be a really fair voter every time, which is very surprising, who knew? But CivilBot can automatically warn bad actors around these specific behaviors. And it gets them to change their behavior most of the time. Most of the time it brings people back into the fold of reasonable behavior. But when it doesn't, CivilBot can also automatically restrict their account with increasing restrictions for each infraction, which is cool. We're still working on rolling that out. It's a little overly sensitive right now, so we're tweaking it, but it's pretty sweet. So overall, how is all of this working? Great. We launched in January, and remember when I said that when Asia worked at TED, anywhere from 20 to 50% of comments needed to be deleted? Well, we built our system with those numbers in mind, thinking the community would have to delete around the same amount. But it turns out that the self-reflection aspect of this design worked really well. Just putting the peer reviews in front of people really affected what they submitted in the first place. So instead of up to 50% with civil comments, only 2% of comments need to be deleted. That means that 98% of what people are submitting in the first place is civil, and nearly all of the rest of it gets filtered out by the community. But the end result is that people are being civil to each other. They're still having arguments, they're still having these spirited debates, but they're changing their rhetoric. A few bad things are still slipping through the cracks, and we're working on it, but overall, people are treating each other with respect and attacking ideas instead of each other. It's amazing. But they have the social pressure to do it, and they know that personal attacks and abuse won't be tolerated by their community. And if they try to cheat the system, they won't be able to participate. And remember how I told you that Asia spent all day, every day, even waking up in the middle of the night, like panicking about comments? Well, since we launched in January, staff moderation time at our customers' sites is down 90%. And people like Asia, this is John Heasley, who is a web editor and digital producer at Register Guard in Eugene, Oregon. These people are so happy as they have their lives back and they can focus on other things besides policing the trolls. And I might look at things and see how they're broken and then just like, thank you, and it's great. And maybe the most surprising to me actually is that participation has increased. Now, when I designed this, as designers we're taught to make accomplishing a task as painless and simple and seamless as possible, right? So I was like, oh man, when we put up these roadblocks and ask people to rate each other's comments, like that is just going to really impact how many comments we get. It's going to go way down. Volumes are going to drop. But the opposite happened. Comment volumes are up, participation has increased. And I think it's just because it's not a toxic place anymore, which is great. So here's the thing. Designers, developers, we can do this. Online harassment and abuse are human problems, but there can be tech solutions. We need to get people to self-reflect, and we need to enforce social norms online. And when we specifically design our platforms to encourage people to treat each other better, they do. Thank you so much. Jesse and Elaine, this conference is amazing, and you're all awesome.